Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, non binary folks, and the like. My name is Is Jones, director of the Watershed Reading Series with Art Lit Lab, and it is my great pleasure to introduce you all to a special edition of the Watershed Reading Series, the No Linebreaks Reading, featuring our three magnificent readers for the evening Rachel Werner, Addae, and Malvika Jolly. The Watershed Reading Series is made possible from support from the Dane Arts with additional funding from the Andres Manufacturing
Good
Company.
evening, ladies, gentlemen, non-binary folks, and the like.
Inc.
My name is Is Jones, director of the Watershed Reading.
The FU Foundation, charitable arm of the Capital Times, and the J. Jerome Frochi Foundation, and the Pleasant T. Rowland Foundation. Please stay after the reading for a brief Q&A with our readers. Rachel Werner is the foundation of the Little Book Project in Wisconsin, a biannual community arts and nonprofit printmaking collaboration. Her literary writing and craft essays have been published by Off Menu Press, Digging Through the Fat, and Voyage YA Literary Journal. A selection of Rachel's recipes are also included in Wisconsin's Cocktails, UW Press 2020, and her poetry in the anthology Hope is the Thing, Wisconsinites on Hope and Resilience in the Time of COVID-19, is forthcoming at the Wisconsin Historical Society in 2021. Please, from the comfort and safety of your couch, give it up for Rachel Werner.
Thank you so much, Is. I am going to read two readings this evening. Both are pieces of short flash fiction. The first one's called A Heroine's Hanging. I step over a grave, then another and another, is so how the dream goes. Before reaching the final tomb, my point of origin. A growing tightness in my chest denotes a hint of disappointment, although the first conscious exhalation betrays my underlying relief and the realization that I'm awake. And faint chimes of a clock one floor below slowly tick away the remaining minutes of my confinement within the vapid isolation of suburbia. I've waited enough. Being on a continuous road to nowhere was a frightening prognosis as a young girl whose main sustenance was free school lunches. Yet once I could afford to shop at Whole Foods weekly, I was meant to be reassured. I belonged. I was no longer poor. I was now privileged. But this life hack never manifested. Still Black, still depressed, verified by sequential glances in the mirror and medicine cabinet. Money made it easier to mask both. Briefly, the yin-yang trigger of my spiraling psychosis. I've cried enough. Our dwindling bank account, my ex-husband scoffs, was the beginning. Not the 2-day laxative binge a month before my 20th birthday, nor the 4-week sabbatical in our basement the week after my 25th. No, now I have issues. And I'm 40, anxious, and out of excuses. I've failed enough for not succumbing, submitting, saving myself. By agreeing to residential psychiatric care. My doctors are perplexed by how indifferent I seem to the arbitrary benchmarks of success I've achieved. Forget the man you saw, shot 7 times in the street, once as a teen, bleeding out in the streets, then 1, 2, 3, on TV, maybe even last week. The trauma just repeats. I've seen enough. But a lack of desire to retain my career, marriage, wealth, social status, turns out, is clinically abnormal. What does it mean to only half exist, even in the world you crafted for yourself? To spend years bartering one's crosses for crowns and still come up short because you're brown. A baby is born half dead if it comes out in the wrong skin. Lifespan shortening with every subsequent year she grows. Demanding to be seen, heard, respected, destined to be dark, broke, and neglected. Surviving and excelling has only led to more personal rejection. So I've lost enough. Before my truth is purged and my anguish extinguished, a warrior dispatched to a battle from which it is now apparent I cannot return. Unwilling to relinquish a freedom my ancestors bled for, perished for, preferring to suffocate on my own pain rather than submit to preconceived chains, my mental illness is a societal sickness. I've suffered enough. A ubiquitous war of hate is a battle with no victor, and the laws written on stolen land and slaves' blood are crushing us all. I have wounds raw down to the marrow of my bones. Having decimated my existence, the parasite of hatred is now poised to claim my daughter as its next victim. Scribbling furiously before nightfall, my epitaph hardens into the jute of a noose. A person of color, I was forever a stranger on American soil. The title of the next piece is The Trial. In and out of pain, of love, of faith, in everything. Before drawing another breath, there are days I need to mar my flesh, or not eat, or both. But there's no one I can talk to about it. Brown-skinned girls don't do such things, so I'm told, by kin, but never by friends who see the lighter shades of me, supposedly, or at least that's what they say to my face. Starving to be thin is a race I aim to win. A hazardous physical goal, yet fuels me mentally. Trauma makes you stronger, at least it better, or else I'm dead already. A ghostly hologram of an overachiever everyone loves or despises depending on their mood, or what they want from me, out of me, constantly. And I give in, always, to fit in, be seen, be heard, yet never adored, because of my skin, which is darker than preferred, by everyone, even myself. This is colorism, a word I never heard before the age of 30, but lived with as a psychological cancer for years. The kryptonite to the black joy I could have inherited had society deemed me, fill in the blank, extraordinary, pretty, worthy, a candle never lit, in darkness, I've just been left to sit. That was me, before I killed. So now here I stand, the courtroom my stage, a tragic figure before you, those among you have made, and I confess for my crimes, yep, I'm still not ashamed. Am I really to blame when the world drove me insane with falsehoods, with pity, restrained by the invisible chains of being a second-rate citizen, despite every charade I played to counter everyone else's perpetual hate, because I refused to serve the state or a male of any race. No longer willing to sacrifice the space between my legs for pleasure I was forbidden to know or request, only meant to be stolen from its rightful owner, which is me. Hence the phrase, once a woman, forever a slave. How many hours of rape does it take to fill days or a decade? An answer no one has bothered to calculate because the victim is feminine, but never explicitly named because we are all the same. Whore, bitch, tease, cunt, desired, then discarded on a whim before the weight of every sin, even his. I needed it to end. Yet still, I'm the villain here, wearing a grin rather than guilt, awaiting a verdict, let's be real, I couldn't give a shit about. Don't make me pretend, nor ask for forgiveness for delivering justice long withheld during time served. Life has been my penance. If only this hell had been a dream, I might actually believe you hear my pleas instead of waiting to judge if what is broken in me can be mended adequately. Do I deserve to burn for never learning my place? Only an object to violate? How could I have forgotten the rules of this place I contemplate, submerged in a room of white faces? Thank you for allowing me to read this evening.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Vegetables, anything cowgirl, and creating the things she wants to see in the world. AJ got into writing when she was 7 and wrote a poem about the water cycle that her 3rd grade teacher eventually hung up in the classroom. Since then, she has grown a strong affinity for words, complex things such as science, design, and creating a bridge between all of those things. AJ's work mainly centers her experience as a dark-skinned Black woman and her Ghanaian-American identity. Her knack for design gives her the ability to create visuals to accompany her reading, her writing, and deliver an experience. Please give it up for AJ Addae.
Hi, everyone. So I'm probably just gonna, I am gonna read just a few poems that are essentially prose, and hopefully it fills 15 minutes. We start a timer. Triple consciousness. Ghanaian. I speak and sand falls from my mouth. My fingers wrinkle the same way my mother's do. My tongue does not. I was born with half a language ripped from my tongue, and still I am forced to remember it by heart. And what came first? The loss of a colonized country or forgetting about it? I look for answers in the syllables of my parents' broken accents, an attempt to remember. In my origin, I was born side first, mouth closed, and still lived. And when I say my origin, I mean the birth of my country. And when I say my country, I mean what is mine and what belongs to me. American. I speak and a rope falls from my mouth. My body, born on the soil of a stolen country, meaning the act of living here is just another way to say the words life sentence. And what came first, the American War or the soil that birthed it? I drink from the mouth of the ocean that buried my ancestors as a means of answers. Some prefer to not see the bodies. Others know that water is nothing but a body. In my origin, I was born silent and still lived. When I say silent, I mean almost quiet enough to hear my language being taken from my body. When I say language, I mean what is mine and what has been taken from me. Black woman. I speak and choke on my own two breasts. My bones ache the same way my great-grandmothers did, and my spirit follows. I ask my mother what came first, the womb or the thing that inhabits it? She answers and says, I am the mother of my own ending. She means some prefer not to see my body, but others know that we are more than just bodies. After my birth, my great-grandmother buried my umbilical cord in Ghana alongside my mother's to ensure my fertility. Meaning in my origin, I emerged from the soil. And by soil, I mean the body that birthed me. And by body, I mean I am but a body until proven ghost. I speak and sand falls from my mouth. My fingers wrinkle the same way my mother's do. My tongue does not. My body born on the soil of a stolen country, meaning the act of living here is just another way to say the words death sentence. And what came first, the American War or the soil that birthed it? My mother answers and says, I am the mother of my own ending. After birth, my great-grandmother buried my umbilical cord in Ghana alongside my mother's to ensure my fertility. I look for answers in the syllables of my parents' broken accents in attempt to remember. In my origin, I was born side first, mouth closed, and still lived, meaning in my origin, I emerged from the soil. And by soil, I mean the body that birthed me. And by body, I mean I am but a body until proven ghost. Thank you. That's my first poem. Okay, that was only like 3 minutes. Okay, we'll cycle through a few. So this next one I wrote last summer when, J. Cole was doing the most on Twitter at like the worst possible time. So this one is called Black Women Are Dying and J. Cole Be the Weakest Link. As snow collects on the bluff in North Carolina, instead of a shovel, a Black man wields a stone, and soon, a daughter again. At the funeral, Black man asked to be taught how to shovel. Says a forest can't grow overnight, meaning he has never seen a Black woman. Like we don't wake every morning and harvest the fruits we done grew last night because the grass is only green on the side where we water it. Black women are dying and J. Cole be a weak link. But before I leave my home, I peel the bark off my skin, dream of my execution and remember that this is what a tree must feel like. That J. Cole says he looks at freedom like trees, like a tree ain't always been where we go to die. Okay, yeah, cute. Yeah, I realize the subject matter is a little, a little, metaphorical, but we're here, yeah. So this next poem this next prose piece rather, is about my name. One thing you'll notice is that my name is AJ, and it stands for my first and middle name, Addae Jamila. So my family's from Ghana, and a lot of people don't really know how to pronounce those names. So I'm gonna read a poem about when people tell me that my name will be mispronounced, AKA butchered. The scene. A 2-syllable slaughterhouse. Massacre that rhymes with nothing. A bow and arrow that always misses. Was almost just the bow, almost just the arrow. 6-year-old Addae asks her mother to call her by an easier name. But there is no outside of my name. My name is the world and all of us are living in it and rhymes with nothing. West African origin story, derivation from peace. Born on a Monday, end of winter, meaning my mother named me after a flavor of freedom, of herself, a kind of season-long wishfulness that not just any tongue can hold the right way, that a Ghanaian tongue can hold just the right way, meaning when you say my name, say it like there's spring around the way in a 2-season country, like yesterday was just Sunday, like my mom wrote it, kept it in her front pocket for nearly 3 decades, no crinkles. Like we live in America now, so we drop a letter, but still say it like it'll butcher you back. Rhymes with nothing, so it stands alone. A solo, no love songs written about it. It is the love song, a Ghanaian chorus kept alive on an American stage. And you can't fit a love song on a souvenir keychain. And nothing can be butchered if it holds a knife too. Yay! Poem number 3, we're getting through it. Okay, let's see where we are on the clock. We're a good 6 minutes, which is great because I have 4 left, so that checks out. This next one is a quick ode to my aunties. Anyone that knows, if you've grown up in any other country, you know that your aunties are like pretty much the framework of your existence. Like I don't understand how that works, but it always does work out. So this one is called Ode to My Aunties in a Post-Colonial Ghana. That code switch between a broken language and a broken home, between themselves and their husbands, thick, rubbery backs that once carried me in the Ntoma despite not knowing my name, who keep a permanent prayer nestled between the gap of their front teeth, that grow up with their country, that did not survive the coup in the 70s, aunties that washed the blood off the entire family's clothes by hand with almost soap, aunties who are not my aunties that only know the words to the gospel, aunties who are the gospel, aunties who spend their lives wearing or unwearing their husbands, aunties whose only whole language is prayer, 2 weeks into Ramadan adorned in henna, aunties brought up by other thick-lipped aunties whose favorite spice is gossip and never cooks anything without it, whose religions are both God and their husbands, aunties that fear no one will marry me, aunties who feed the whole neighborhood only with bread and nutmeg, aunties named Selassie, meaning God hears me, aunties that wear a red lip but only half smile and pictures, that take up too little space, that take up too much space, aunties whose bra straps are family secrets, whose breasts sag from all the children and men they fed, aunties that have never missed a funeral, whose favorite song is the way their husbands call them, aunties that will raise every child they meet or everyone they love, and the who they love or how they love. Cool. Shout out to my aunties. They're not here like listening to this, but still shout out to them. Okay, I'm gonna read one more. I'm stuck between either this Afrofuturist one or the one about my hair, but I think I'm gonna go with the one about my hair because we've been struggling a lot lately and I just feel like, you know, she deserves a little credit. So this one is, both? Okay, you know, they're both short. I'll do both. So this one is called List of Things My Hair Has Broken. Combs, brushes, bobby pins, hair ties, headbands, gravity, teeth, in, silence, barriers, and through. List of things my hair has broken. 1. Combs that I snap in two from coils, even from the kitchen of my hair. From this, my mother sees ads on the television and buys me 2. Brushes that I still use to this day to collect my hair on my head and tuck it under my scalp along with my other fears and fix them in place with 3. Bobby pins. A white girl in 6th grade tells me in front of the whole class that she's pleased to have fine hair that will never look like mine. Yet when all is quiet and nobody is listening, she asked me to borrow one of my 4 hair ties. Last week, my hair outgrew my hair ties and everything my mother has ever told me about it. I look in the mirror and let loose the prison my mother and the white girls at school wrapped my hair in, and finally don a headband. And now my hair defies gravity. And now my hair breaks teeth. And now my hair breaks in. And now my hair breaks silence. And now my hair breaks barriers. And now my hair breaks through. I really like this, not me talking about my own poem that I like, but I really like this poem because I drew like a little visual for it a few years ago. So when you see it all mapped out, you'll see like the things that my hair is broken, like all listed out. So it's cute, it's fun. But this is the last poem I'll read. Thank you all for listening. This one is super short and it's called Black People Only Write About the Moon. Fact. If they look at you like an alien just enough, you become one too. Black history is just another way to say the word astrophysics, meaning Isaac Newton was an African studies scholar, meaning when Isaac Newton said an object remains at rest unless acted upon by another object, he meant that we were once unbothered. They came to space and packed us on boats and took us to Earth and then came back to gentrify the moon. Audre Lorde told us we are never meant to survive, but we do. Light years and CP time are the same thing. I checked the box that said African Earthling instead of just Earthling. Toni Morrison was right. We write ourselves into a fantasy because here we are one. When my mother exclaims, she exclaims about the heavens. We only call the names of anywhere but here. We write about elsewhere when here is just too bloody. Thank y'all so much for listening. I really appreciate it. On to the next writer.
So much, AJ. That was gorgeous. Give it up one more time for AJ from the comfort and safety of your couches. We are now going to go into our final and amazing last reader, Malvika Jolly. Molvika is an artist, writer, and socialist on occupied Chamasa, Tonga, and Kiza land in Los Angeles. Her essays, interviews, and criticism have appeared or are forthcoming in Chicago Magazine, The Margins, and Southside Weekly, where she is a regular contributor focusing on visual culture and community histories in Chicago's South Side. She's a special projects associate at the Brooklyn Rail, where she works on the daily conversation series, the new social environment, and curates the radical poetry reading series. Ask her about the new third world. Please give it up for Malvika Jolly.
Oh my God. Thank you, Itiola. Thank you all so much. AJ, incredible, incredible. My reading is just going to be notes on your reading. And I hope that's all right. I'm just here to make you blush. So here are my notes on your reading. I love that so resonant line, you came first. What came first? The loss of a colonized country or forgetting about it? All of those lines about origin, the birth of the country, what is mine and what belongs to me. Just so phenomenal. Itiola knows that I'm always thinking about and embarrassing her about that line of hers, which I used to keep above my desk on like a post-it to inspire and contextualize and situate myself. And that line was, the ocean grants safe passage at a cost. And I was thinking about that a lot because of the room we're all in as you were reading, and as I was deciding what I should read. Really feeling like so much of that line is so vital, and if let me if you'll indulge me for a moment, as you were reading, I was thinking so much about hauntology, and then the ocean as a kind of contract, as a conduit of transactions and also of faith, and then the question of like, how do we recontextualize ourselves in relationships of adjacency and closeness, and in like solidarity, we those who awake on the other side, you know, like how do we resituate and reintegrate ourselves? Yeah, this is so fantastic. Perhaps too much to start with the thesis, but I feel like those are the ideas that are behind so much of my writing. And that line you said, I'm the mother of my own ending, you know, a poem being an ode to my aunties in a post-colonial Ghana, was really beautiful and motivated me to sort of throw out my set list and read a set of poems that I've written really recently. They're really fresh and they're called Dream Daughter. So I hope that's all right. They're kind of new, but maybe this is the right workshop for me. All right, great. I'm going to set a timer. I'm so excited to be here. There's something really fun about the anonymity of the YouTube reading, not knowing who's in the room, but knowing who would be in the room. And while we have a moment, I want to say thank you so much to Rita, to James, and to Itiola, and to everyone on this team. This has been like such a beautifully coordinated event, and I'm so thrilled to be in the Zoom room so like rigorously and competently handled. It feels like you're being driven by someone who knows how to drive. So I'll read this poem, Dream Daughter, and we'll see how much time we have left. All right, everyone take a sip, a breath. Okay, Dream Daughter, after Jane Wong, who has a poem, Dream Daughter, with onions. She's peeling a citrus in seminar with the sharpened mouth of a bared key. She's making the same joke daily about unlocking its potential, in which every keyhole becomes a navel, every navel a doorstep, and in our belly a mammalian ache. And she's in a performance art ensemble in which 5 people play one accordion, and she is the original custodian of the accordion. She has half-moon feet, her footprints multiply like a Xerox, a palimpsest, lay out a carpet with eyes to guard the path, wherever we may go, and are lauded on the southernmost tip of the continent, where 2 oceans meet a river and warmly collide. She is deep friends with everyone's grandmothers, including yours, mine, and hers, and she is painting her toenails black on the dashboard, watching foreign films, learning Arabic in school, taking the overnight train to fishing villages, sleeping above the burning fields, looking out at me from my mother's snapshots with a sudden and brash knowledge. That was 1. 2. With a sudden and brash knowledge, she is visiting Nekchun's rock gardens, telling a story about partition, about the land lost between borders, between the decipherable and the indecipherable, that which evades translation and spills out from over the sides, belonging to no one but the forgotten. 3. In traditions of non-belonging, that which is forgotten is inherited by those who live easily in the margins. And in this spirit, she is boarding her friends one by one onto the Angelica's street-side dumbwaiter. She is acting both tour guide and station agent of girlhood degeneracies. She is pointing out the movie theater, the movie poster her father showed her, reading Sipahi in French and English, tracing how a single word floats, eyes closed, across the blood waters of deep language. In the final hours before estrangement becomes an ethic, distance a way of looking at the world. Is this 4? 4. In search of a way of looking at the world, she is boarding the dumbwaiter of gestures, riding the escalator through the airport of desires. At the cinema, she is inputting dramatic structure into her muscle memory, ache by ache by ache, verse by verse by verse, how a scene turns, how a joke lands, how the wink is the key that makes the strip a tease, how the ear teases the click in the barrel, how to fold into every slap a kiss, and how to button up each kiss with a smack. She's learning dualities in every venue, the surgical theater, the lending library, the kitchen table, the dentist chair. She's knocking at their doors with the key of her own devising. She's carving out the paths with a grapefruit spoon. Is that 5? I'm going to need a call-in response. I need people to tell me. 5? They're not numbered. 5. She's carving out keys of her own devising. She's paving a path that does not knock. A natural affinity for tap dancing with no lessons. She's falling in love doing a party trick involving hot knives, and she's saying of a photograph taken from 30 feet away, "Ah, he'll see my leg hairs," and throwing her head back with laughter. She's neck deep in the salt river, crossing on the back of an unbaked clay pot, and she speaks every language you have inherited and every language I have forgotten, and she is inking the night sky with her black hair. AJ, that's for you. a natural socialist with the most unnatural conception, and she is missing my calls one after the other, but picking up always for unknown numbers, in case it is the Communist Party on the other line, not wanting to offend the gestures of elders. 6. In the grand tradition of familial gestures, she's walking the fictive dog we adopted when plague came to our apartment door in Harlem and found the key we left on the doorstep, barking herself into a corporeal existence, the dog an excuse to take outdoor excursions, and she is walking him up and down the Hudson underneath the West Side Highway, because where the light can't reach is the only place no one's telling you, can't tell, he's nothing but shadow, only hear him barking like a tuna can lid. In the year we shuttered our windows, sang to everyone, please, please, pretend there is no dog here at all. That is the only place he knows how to be. 7. And yet this is only one of many places we know how to be. Like freshwater pearls on my mother's longest strand, one knot in the long net of inheritance, my dream daughter finds herself scattered, dispersed under threat, across the ambient of the world. 8. Dispersed across the ambient of the world, we dream daughters. We dream daughters like bougainvillea, climbing up the boundary wall as old as independence, and also dream daughters like a vine of moonflowers, blooming only once in an Englewood alley. She went to work for a time, my dream daughter, at the farm at World's End, learned there to sow that which will grow in no place else, spilling out from her mouth the seeds of remembrance. And she possesses that rare and infatuating knowledge that the world is nothing but a swollen reliquary for the forgotten and the departed, and we are in its belly for a fortnight only and no longer. 9. She reminds me, thank you. 9, question mark. She reminds me of you, of me, of everyone we have ever lost found again, and she reminds me of no one, only of herself, and while I write this poem, she is tunneling away from me on the transatlantic train. She's in the locked bathroom compartment, curling her lashes with a spoon. 10. Speaking of portals, she has carved into her bedroom door an orchard of flowering jacaranda trees, and when she moves out, they keep blooming in her absence. Now here emerges the gardener, white-haired, who has tended to them his whole life, and answering an inquiry into the raining seasons of his life one day, he opens his palm, and there we see her likeness among the vineyard's tangled roots. 11? Among the vineyard's tangled roots, we are speaking again of the scale of generations. We are speaking again of doors. And it is a tradition on the occasion of dying to be laid out on your very own front door, the door to your ancestral home. We dream daughters who bear a notable likeness in sleep to your aunt's aunt, to everyone's aunt's aunt, to our aunt's aunt, who upon the occasion of dying was carried out by a parade of mourners on her very own vanity table as they marched, throwing down her perfume and ether bottles and cracking them down on the rocks as they went. Let them know, she had instructed. Let them remember that I was a fragrant woman. 12. Yeah, come on, aunties. 12. When kissing, she remembers how poetry lives on, not in collected works and literary presses, but by taking your turn in that archaic gesture, passed from mouth to mouth. 13. In summer, a young man feeds her gnocchi. He rolls for her one at a time off a washboard he pulls from the back alley and sands down with a strip of sandpaper folded into his wallet. He reads her a long poem about time until sunrise, and then he begins all over again. He reads with so much conviction that he no longer needs the verses. He reads with so much conviction that in that collapsed bed, a fragment of her heart sleeps contentedly still. Her father hires a carpenter to build her a desk special fitted to the best lit corner of her room to read from, but when the power cuts out, she studies her exam papers on the streets under the light of a halogen lamp. As a child, she whispers secrets into the mirrors of parked cars, recognizing in them pairs of shy and hesitant ears. She meets another man in the streets of a distant city, and when he laughs, she smells almond blossoms from a distant landscape, loses herself for a season, then returns. Maybe 14. 14. In her infancy, we go on twilight walks down Blackstone, down Harper, down Kinbark, circle the building shaped like a toaster, night bicycle sleepy cycles, in the parking lot on Pulaski and get thoroughly spooked. We travel to the Goan coast to attend Portuguese New Year's Mass on the night the power cuts off across the city. We walk into the Arabian Sea all together, bathing this time in the ink-black nights of each other. And in university, she is reading third world feminisms and worshipping at the altar of the Black radical tradition. She's running away to Portobello, to former slave ports and colonies. She is remembering, she is knowing, she is becoming acquainted with what it means to be free. She is visiting her aunties in Kumasi and cooking jollof. She is sailing away for Cuba to help bring in the sugar harvest with the Panthers. She is reading Amar Chitrakarta comics and sipping mango juice from a fruity bottle. And she spends long summers and full days with herself learning about sovereignty. 15. In the summer of learning sovereignty, we find the house that held a vineyard in its palm, its 1,000 modeled bottles, its secret basement uncorked and rancid. Did you know, I tell her, that back in the day, the globe was covered in olive trees, this forest unburied with villages, that sometimes, and she stops me here, the spoon in her hand like a cane, and her already looking out past the story, to the garden like a tiny forgotten shard of the moon, she tells me gently, she says to me, our wine is sour, but it is ours. That's the end of that one. Thank you for deep patience, my goodness. Let's see how long that was, 9 minutes. Boom. So this is a poem I wrote. I think I think perhaps all of us in this Zoom will understand the gesture of imagining a daughter who is in fact ourselves and is in fact our mothers, and like the daughters our mothers were, and that we, the mothers that our mothers might have needed, right? I think that's a very cyclical gesture inherent to like this group of people. I see Itiola gets it. And I think there's also something about the colonial encounter, right? For me, I think these are the same question folded together, right? Like, how do we reimagine ourselves outside of like how do we reimagine ourselves outside of being squashed and homogenized into POC solidarity and coalition building, right? How do we imagine ourselves living the full lives where we never had that particular trauma? And how do we put it all together so that I hope this is making sense. But to me, it's like I try to imagine this kind of upbringing as the origin story that makes sense for who I am, who I have become. And then by imagining it this way, I can look back and see that it was in fact true. And I can look forward and see that it will be true that way. Yeah, so I think I have time for maybe one more. Thank you all for deep patience. This is fantastic. So this will be my middle poem. It's very short. This is also a poem. This is a poem about kinship, but it's more a poem about place. I think those are the only things I talk about. And this is a poem in the voice of a friend of mine, an interlocutor named Charlotte Kinkosas. And the poem is called You Fall in Love with a Person Who Says. You fall in love with a person who says, food is everywhere in the city. Why should I pay for coconut water when next door to my uncle's house there is his neighbor's tree? Why should I pay for avocados when my father is primed with the BB gun at the other neighbor's tree, letting them fall in our above-ground pool, which we have, like grenades? When we marry, as we might as well do, why pay also for the caterer? My mother who lives in her garden with her 101 tinctures, her husband, my father with his salsa band. Why would we? Why would we, when each part of our lives has come together, has co-conspired to make us live in plenty? That one was short. Let's see how much time we have. All right, 3 minutes, let's boogie. All right, now I have a poem. This is maybe different senses of place. I have a poem that goes hyper-local to the south side of Chicago, where I grew up and my soul resides. And then I have a poem that is a translation that I did of a poem by Fez Ahmed Fez, and it's about kind of homeland and Palestine. So could we do a show of hands between these three folks I can see? Do we have like Chicago?
I feel like Chicago might be the move.
Might be the move, Chicago.
Yeah, so that feels like a good impulse.
Right, all right, cool. All right, so this will be my last poem. I want to thank you all for letting me into this space. It's been so fun. And this is the first part of a series of poems that I'm titling In Dream Chicago. It kind of comes out of a tradition of when my friends from college and we would have people visit us who were not from Chicago. We would give them the Chicago tour, and our rule was rule was, I see I'm getting mail. Our rule was that we would not take them to the north side of Chicago. We would not take them to the middle side of Chicago. We would not take them downtown. We would pick them up from the airport and we'd do only the south side tour because that is the full cultural history of Chicago. It's right there. And then people would find out, having spent 2 weeks not leaving the different, like, enormous neighborhoods that is the city of the south side of Chicago, they would see, a neighborhood elsewhere and they'd get really mad. They'd be like, you only showed me this one little bit. But I think it makes sense to do it that way. So this is a series of poems called In Dream Chicago, and I'll read just the first part. This is my last poem. In Dream Chicago. In Dream Chicago, the Midway Plaisance is run over with lakewater canals. The canals run over with paper boats. The paper boats unfold into letters from everyone you have ever longed after in the night, writing to say they have been missing you. All this time, ever since, and still. In Dream Chicago, the streets are lined with mulberry trees. Beneath them, your parents do not age, they are young forever, always chasing you, never giving up, working late hours because they still can, and lounging in their gardens because such are the spoils of youth. Countless people are alive still in Dream Chicago. They are, say when, since always. We celebrate by giving them their flowers while they're here and pouring out shots of malort directly into their mouths. In Dream Chicago, it is always the World's Fair. In the first weeks of spring, we walk out past the limestone, out past the ice. We knot our hands together, and together we walk out onto the lake, and then we come home. In Dream Chicago, our lighthouse is manned by the blind, which is all of us, from the smallest to the largest, everyone in attendance on Saturdays. We sit facing the lake with our boots kicked up on the radiator, reading slim paperback novels with our hands, and seeing out onto each side. In Dream Chicago, you ask for a 2-day holiday and receive a full lifeblood of summer times. Half-cakes are the currency of friendship. We drink horchata amid prairie grasses in a Mexican restaurant, which is really the backyard of a clapboard house. And to remember how we arrived, we walk through the clockwork heart of a home where children are growing, young and old, young and old. Because in Dream Chicago, X is Y is Z, and Z is something else altogether. In Dream Chicago, you climb up the stairs of the Nowhere apartment, run your palms along the walls lined with lipstick kisses. The woman on the inside doesn't care that your feet have helped themselves right into her home. She is thrilled, and she gives you a tour. And it isn't until the night, as you wash off your face in the mirror, that you notice a trail of feathered touches behind your ears, black currant, red currant, and mulberry. In Dream Chicago, the longest living woman in the city lives in your very own apartment building. You read it in the free paper on your way home from school, and when you find her in the elevator that very same afternoon, you say, "Excuse me, aren't you the longest living woman in the city of Chicago, the one who lives in my very same building?" And she exclaims, yes, I am! So good of you to recognize me. It's been such a very long time," and feeds you slices of buttered pastry on her coffee table on the second floor, beneath a painting of a boy and some peaches, each clasping the other in its flushed palms. Her name is Thora, and in Dream Chicago, she is alive and holding the title still. In Dream Chicago, she remembers you when she moves away. Her daughters move into the apartment on the second floor with some children, 2 boys, because in Dream Chicago, there are no landlords, just like there are no locks and no lock keepers. One day, she gives you the painting of the boys, the peaches. In the new painting, it is a small girl from Delhi, and in place of the pastoral scene, she's on an elevator with the oldest woman in the world. They are eating thick pieces of lemon cake. From the east, the hum of the cardamom-scented lake, and in the dark of their mouths, something starts to smile. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Malvika. Give it up one more time for Malvika Jolly. Give it up one more time for Rachel Werner. Give it up one more time for Addae. Thank you all so much for this wonderful, amazing, life-affirming reading. We have a few questions that have come in from Facebook. Our wonderful, amazing tech person, Jim, will help us filter through all of them. So the first question for everyone is, where could we find more of your work? We're also going to circulate the links to our patrons as well.
Can I just jump in with this?
Yeah.
Is there an order we should go in? I will say that I'm like relatively new to publishing poetry, publishing prose, which is like a great ambition of mine. Not ambition, but a great desire. of mine, but I've published some lyric essays and a number of interviews, mainly with artists and like cultural workers, generally in Chicago, but more broadly, and those you can find in a wonderful alt weekly called the Southside Weekly, and you can find them in Chicago Magazine. I also work at the Brooklyn Rail, where you can kind of see my curatorial and emceeing work. That's it from me. Can I pass it over to AJ?
Yes, please.
I want to say I'm generally new to publishing, but like, I'm very territorial about my children. So I usually like to self-publish. So I have a newsletter that you can find at ajiswriting.com. And I typically write like all kinds of like essays in the newsletter and just a monthly curation of like design, ethics, culture. I don't want to say culture, design, ethics, and writing. Yeah, so ajiswriting.com, I would say that's like the best place to find me, especially because I've been having a lot of writer's block. Okay, I'm gonna throw it over to Rachel.
So I'm at the opposite end of the spectrum for my other two lovely co-readers tonight. Since I write completely, that's what really pays my bills, except for teaching writing classes. I have like a full professional website where anything that is posted, published somewhere online, you can access at rachelwernerpressfolios.com. And like James so lovely said, he'll be sharing the links on Facebook and other sites as well. And then I curate work by other artists and a zine that comes out called The Little Book Project that I started. And there's a website for that, and that's Little Book WI. If you kind of just want to see the other artists that I help feature who live here in Wisconsin, it's literary and visual work together. And then a new edition comes out twice a year. And then I'm really prophetic about like publishing any news I have to share. I'm all about, singing my praises. So definitely follow me on Instagram at The Real Script, or Twitter at The Real Scripts, and then LinkedIn as well at The Real Script. So, if I have news to share, it's out there. So, and I keep all my bio updated every time there's a new publishing in a book. And there's a book coming out, actually an anthology published by the Wisconsin Historical Society called Hope is a Thing. And I have poetry in that.
Don't forget the name. Our next question is from Facebook. Would you all be interested in sharing a bit about your process and how it takes for you to reach your finished works? Are there particular places or environments that are inspiring to work in? What kind of music is inspiring to you all, etc.?
So I'm going to start this time. I would say that you're always working on it. It might feel done in a moment, but almost inevitably, if I leave something for 6 months or 9 months and I go back to it, you might change it or revise it. Sometimes you write something just for a particular season in life. There are some things you never go back to and they never see the light of day again. And then I would say anybody who has serious publishing aspirations, that's definitely a concept that's good to get your mind wrapped around, because you will have an agent like I do now, and they will tell you this is not done. I want you to fix this. And then you have publishers eventually and more editors that will tell you, I want you to fix this or change this in some way. And fix is probably a word, but I think you just have to realize that you may not be satisfied with it. And even sometimes something more will come to you, or you'll realize there's more to the story. I think that particularly is true for poetry. And then yeah, I don't know. I just feel like there's always something there. I'm blessed to always feel like it's great to just keep looking for new things. There isn't really music, I would say, that inspires me so much. I would say it's mostly lived experience or stories that I feel like that still haven't been told, especially from a historical point of view.
Molvika, I definitely want to hear from you on this question.
It's such a good question. And it's so funny to be on like the other side of the hot seat, because I feel like I spend a lot of time being an interviewer or like preparing the skeletal script for an interviewer, and like putting together little questions like this. And it's such a good question. And in answering it, I'm so curious to hear what everyone else has to say. And I don't know that I have one. It's a really good question. But I will say I have some thoughts that I've put together in terms of process. And one of them is that I heard a really wise thing described to me, which I now use as a framework, that some people write like they're architects, right? Some people like you draft a plan, you build a structure, you make like level by level, increment by increment, an execution of a design. And then some people, it's more like tending to a garden. right? Like you go, you know, like, and they plant the seeds and they're not growing, so frog goes and like plays violin to the seedlings and like speaks to them and reads them poetry. But you're just doing the work of like creating I love this gay icons. But I feel like that's much more the framework I use, and I feel like the process of arriving at a process for me has been like disinvesting myself from shame about having process. So just like really bare bones, I don't know how to write, but I will say it happens to me like if I get a line, an idea or something, I write it, I text myself with it. I added myself to my phone as a contact, and I text her more than I text anyone else. She's my favorite interlocutor, and every time I text her something, you know, Steve Jobs has you, it'll just come right back to you, right? So it's like great fun to be yelling into the well of yourself. So I've called her self diary. I text her everything I want to remember in a cool space of your texts to yourself. I'll have a lot of fun drafting it, and then I'll forget about it for like 6 months, and then I'll need to write something, and I'll like go looking through it, I'll find something, and I'll put it onto a doc. And it's so defamiliarized by that point that I can kind of edit and revise, but I'm very new to a revision process. I've just started attending workshops. I attended one brilliant workshop on craft elements with Joy Priest, which taught me a lot about sitting, like sitting with discomfort, being like, oh, okay, I don't know how to revise, that's the revision. And then kind of, you know, trotting them out before they're ready to show to people. Like I've started this thing where I will now send, if I'm writing something, I'll send it to everyone, like a mailer, like a spam. I'm like, here you go, here you go, here you go. They're like nudes. Or if there's like sharing them in a place where they're not ready and it's discomforting, I've noticed like that having to sit as you read it, all of the revision comes straight to the surface. Like, you know, it comes straight to the surface and you can scoop them up. So that's my process as of yet, but I am in the market for a process. So hit me up if you want to sell me a process. I'm excited to hear AJ's.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. There's not really process is a strong word for me. I think one thing I've noticed is that it's not so much for me the how to write something like in the beginning stages, but it's like parsing out the thought. So I think a lot of writing is like 70% your thought process, 30% like communicating it, or vice versa, depending on what you're trying to do. So sometimes it can be 70% communicating it, 30%, not necessarily the thought process, but like, you know, just like what you're thinking, like, you know, if it's like a complex idea, or, you know, oh, this is something new, or this is something exciting, or this is something I want to write about. It's more so once I figure out something I want to write about, then after that is when I start trying to understand, like, okay, well, why do I want to write about this? Like, why do I truly want to write about it? And then everything from there is honestly a blur. It just like ends up being written at some point. And I find myself revisiting it like late at night, once my mind is idle, like right out of the shower or something, which is honestly the worst like time to get an idea, because then you're like, I'll remember it, because you don't have like a pen and paper in the shower, and then it's gone. Like it just happened to me yesterday. So truly, like, I really think it's dependent on the person, like realizing how do you know when it's done? I don't know. I feel like my body knows and like my soul knows, and I just listen to them. I hope that was helpful.
AJ,
I just want to say, oh
no, go ahead.
No, I just want, there's one more thing I just realized while the other two wonderful ladies were sharing that I realized I should have said, which is, whatever your process is, please fall in love with it and just focus on that. You know, so if you're a morning writer, go with it. If you're a night owl writer, do that. You know, whatever the nudes, all the different terminology people are using, I love all of it, but don't get so obsessed with the end result. I feel like what really ends up killing the joy of writing and the passion of writing for so many creative people, and I probably think this is true probably for all artists in different ways, is that they get so obsessed on whatever like the goal is. And it's great to have goals. So if it's getting published, if it's, you know, in a journal or a book or whatever it is, those are all great things, but don't get so obsessed about the end result, because there's so much about the end result you can't control, right? Like, you know what I mean? And so I just hope, that's what I would wish for everybody watching this and every creative person everywhere, is that they just love their process and they keep feeding that and gleaning joy out of it however they can.
That was so beautiful, y'all. Thank you so much for that. Another question that came in: what role does a poet hold in modern society? I'd love to hear first from Rachel, even though you just talked. Rachel, what do you think, in your opinion, or in your experience, maybe, what role does a poet hold in modern society, or even a prose writer hold in modern society?
I think to reflect the times, I think that's the one thing that's been true with poetry or verse, let's just say the lyrical form, since antiquity. You think back to Plato, Dante, Socrates, all these people, they were commenting on like their times and what society, what was present and what was lacking, morality, those kind of basic human instincts and how that manifests in your era. So I would say, I think that's true for us. I mean, it's great if you want to write, fantasy or fairy tale type lyrical too, but I think if you can somehow weave commentary in that and just be in that honesty about your lived experience, I think that's your role as a poet.
And what say you, Molvika?
I wonder if you could tell I was like taking notes. I feel like
notes from who? Just in general?
Notes on you.
Oh.
I think it's such an interesting question, right? Because it has to do with like directionality, right? Like, I feel like the question is, okay, poet society, what is the relationship? Where does the arrow point? How do they relate to one another? And I think it's interesting because it can function in two ways. So earlier today, I was at yesterday, actually, I was at a museum called The Broad with some friends in Los Angeles, and we were talking about how for the Kennedys and for so many more who are kind of in these lineages of politics, American politics, right, that going to war is the mechanism, right? Going to war, like going to Harvard, going to war is the mechanism that gets you into political office. It's like you have to go through it to get to there. I don't know why I was thinking about war with poetry, but I think, you know what? It's the poet Robert Graves. Right? The mechanism that gets the poet Robert Graves to be a poet Robert Graves is that he's soldier-poet, right? He goes through war, he becomes a historian, and then he's the poet. And I was thinking about so much of, there's so many brilliant like academics and critical thinkers, and that I'm thinking of specifically, but I don't want to name because I'm about to say a theory that I've put together. But I noticed this thing when you have so many like academics, critical thinkers, literary scholars, people who do like deep analysis, historical analysis. And I noticed that with those friends of mine who come into it, who have come up through poetry, right, came up through writing poetry and then go to these different fields, I noticed the criticism, the theory is so good. Right? It's so good because they're used to sitting at the increment of the line and figuring out how do you transmute, how do you translate an idea in such a way that it's fresh in someone's head. So you're handing them the little lozenge that is the idea arriving. You're not handing them like chit-chatting about it, right? And I was thinking about how for people like that, poetry is a mode, right? It's kind of like an affect, it's a state of being, it's an atmospheric sensibility. It's like what you're paying attention to, right? A way of paying attention, archiving, note-taking, thinking, a way of producing those little lozenges, but that process, that mechanism or that method can lead you to anything, right? Like war to the president, like the great war to the historian poet. And then on the other side, I'm like, I have a much more realistic answer, which is that I think at the present moment, poets are allowed to comment on global politics in a way that is considered not impartial, but because it's under the guise, like under the trench coat of arts and culture. It can traffic Twitter, it can traffic cultural organizations, it can traffic like new media much better, right? So I'm noticing, and it has to do with brevity and length too. Like we've watched the Palestinian occupation unfold since May of this year now, for how many months we've seen it day by day. And the request for US media to publicize it was met with a lot of stalling. And then what we saw happen is that like over Twitter and over, performances, readings, etc., it was people indirectly use poetry and use the arts to position to gesture at and present their political allegiance, whether it's like a condoning or a condemnation. And I think in that way poetry is functioning. Like the role of the poet might be, this is a little bit too pragmatic, but the role of the poet might be to produce the bite-sized piece, the bite-sized material, the bite-sized poem that can be used to make political statements of like morality, political statements of ethics, right? Like I'm thinking of so many poems. The poet, so many poems. My God, so many. Ginha Johari, Tarfia Faizullah, Arya Aber. So many poets right now. We're having such a like resplendent moment of generativity, and all of those poems are being used by people who are saying, listen, these political issues are an ethical litmus test, right? And you need something. You need the little thing. And I think if the little thing is a poem, that's fine.
Yes.
I'm so glad that was coherent for you.
No, because I'm the exact same way. Like, yeah. I'm like, y'all, good luck with putting together my thoughts. I think for me personally, like, I mean, everything everyone else literally just said. For like, I think with poetry, there's something so inherently anti-establishment about it, even in the practice itself, because, you know, you're subverting the whole idea of like very structured writing and being able to put pretty much anything on. And that only is something, like if I was going to choose a channel of writing, I want to be in the one that subverts. Like, no, think about it. All the poets that like followed rules, their poems were like, they weren't flames. I'm sorry, the Star Spangled Banner, not flames. So like, it's just, it's pretty much just being able to choose everything else, which is really just choosing you as opposed to choosing like conventions of writing. So yeah.
I mean, can we also say poetry has the lowest barriers of entry? And I think that kind of material reality, you can write a poem in a day if you want. You can write a poem without craft class. You could write a poem without being at NYU for your MFA. You can, you can
exactly
get a full scholarship in pedagogy and poetry off of Twitter, and it'll be 10 times better than the one you'll get dropping 100K.
Me, that's where I got mine.
Yeah, and I think those, and your poem will circulate better than fiction. It'll circulate better, like, because of brevity, not because of quality, because of by the line. And I think
it's like a daily anthology.
Well, yeah, I'm going to push the line, as to use your term, even a little bit more about the fact that I would say that it's not even, you don't need an MFA to write at all. I don't care if you're writing poetry, prose, I don't care what you're writing. You don't need an MFA. and I think that type of mentality, that is something we've bought into collectively as an institution and kind of like in a westernized society. And so I think, there's craft. Matthew Solis, if you haven't read it yet, there's this amazing book called Craft in the Real World. And I highly recommend it. And it's true, I would say, of most of the most developed countries in the world, is very like a very narrow lens, whereas, so you start thinking about in other cultures, other societies, what's allowed to be considered a poem or prose, whatever, is very varied and different. And so we need to collectively start to free our minds. You know what I mean? Like I tell my students all the time, like you're choosing to buy into like your writing has value and it's worthy. Your story needs to be told, and you're already telling your stories, right? And the more people who start demanding that and acknowledging that is what's really going to get the publishing industry to shift and change. So that's the dialogue we need to be having. There's power in the words that we use. So every time your mind goes to that place, like, I'm not qualified to do this, I don't care what you want to write. You know what I mean? You say, no, I am, because I have something to say, and there's value here. There's integrity, what I have to say. I've lived, I'm a human, and there's, I'm here, see me, hear me. Okay. We all need to start demanding that a little bit more for ourselves and our brothers and sisters.
Ooh, I know that's goodness. Do we have any more questions left? I don't think so.
Can we uplift something that Rita shared in the chat, which is so brilliant that we have to embarrass her now? I love this thing. It's like DeLillo said about nuns, that we have to have someone who still has faith. So do we need to have poets because we need someone who still feels? I'm kind of wondering, I really like this thought.
Yeah, I agree.
Look at, yeah. And I guess my question is, like, I'm wondering, do we agree with this? Is this the way it functions, that maybe poets are like the proxy, the ethical proxy for the outrage or the sentiment or the love that should be universal over particular issues and maybe calls attention to it? Like, is like the light that goes off in a way that is alluring to bring you to a certain issue?
I don't want to take away too much time, but I'm thinking about these sort of milestone moments people have in their lives: funerals, weddings, sometimes births, birthdays. And people often call on poets to be sort of, emotional keepers of those moments, right? You ask a friend, oh, could you write a poem for my wedding? Like, oh, could you write a poem? My grandma passed away. And then these moments in which like our lives need an acute emotional register that poets are uniquely qualified to be in the space of, a little bit more so than maybe other genres, right? But
the inauguration.
Inaugurations too, yeah. Times of a collective spiritual crisis, we call on poets as well, right? And I think those things are really important too. I mean, like it does create this sort of societal imbalance in where we feel like poetry is dead because we only call on poets for these very specific things. But there's a lot to be said. About how that's the specific genre we reach for in moments of heightened, intense crises or joy.
Itiola, you're so smart.
Oh, as my mother said, I'm putting my degree. Yeah, AJ, Rachel, I would love to hear from either of you all. AJ, you want to start us off?
Oh, for what? Sorry. Like to what you just said.
Yeah, about poets who feel being akin to nuns who have faith, and what Malvika said about the emotional register that we call on when it comes to poetry.
Yeah, because I feel like what poetry essentially does for me is it takes a knot and it slowly, like, when you have your headphones tangled up in your bag and you have to literally, you have no choice but to go through each single tangle and like take it apart. And then, your headphones are all unraveled. I feel like that's what poetry does. It like unravels these knots that people like add more tangles to over time. And so not a lot of people want to do that work, sort of like how not a lot of people want to do the work of like, being emotional. So like, that's how I'm sort of seeing that metaphor, like that parallel in my head. So yeah, I agree.
Rachel, did you want to chime in on that as well?
I would just say I can answer it on a personal level. For me, I would say my poetry and my lyrical writing is definitely the more cathartic version of it for me. So much of what I write is, or my life really, professionally is performative in some way, or it's kind of, on display for consumption in some way, shape or form. I'm writing about food, I'm writing about beauty, I'm broadcasting on social media, doing this or that. And when I'm writing for kids, I really want there to always be kind of a positive levity to that, either education or levity in some way. So my poetry, I feel like, is my most personal writing. And it's definitely the places where I would say you kind of get to start. It's like, oh, I actually am a complex human being and not like this Barbie doll.
That was very perfect. Amazing. I think that if we have no more questions left, I don't believe we do, we will adjourn here. I want to thank you all so much for tuning in wherever you are in the world. If you like this programming, please be sure to follow us on all our social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, at Art Lit Lab, on all of our social handles. Also, if you would like to donate, you can please visit us at artlitlab.org/support us/donate. All of your donations will be able to keep programming like this easy and accessible to the public. I want to thank you all so much for tuning in. I want to thank our beautiful, wonderful, incredible, amazing, life-affirming writers here before us. Please tune in for our September reading coming up soon. Thank you all so much and have a good evening.
Thank you, everybody.